Good day, everybody. This is Competere, and this is Pietro Paganini at our podcast, Futuro Prossimo. And today we are in English because the World Environment Day is June 5th and 2002, and we are celebrating this with two great guests that I'm going to introduce, despite a very complicated name, at least for us, for Italians. So we are from Solidaridad, one of our network and our partners organization, and is Gert correct, Gert? And then we have Michelle Desilets. That's the beauty of our podcast. Why we have them? Because it's the Environment Day. A few days ago, we celebrated with Friends of Earth. We celebrated the Biodiversity Day, but today is let's say the Environment Day, is the Earth Day, or in general. We want to talk about the ecosystem and what's happening. You know, in our usual 20 minutes, the usual smart style, we try to do so, at least with two great speakers. They have already been part of our webinars and roundtables. Gert, I want to start with you working at Solidaridad and the tremendous job you guys are doing, particularly on the labor front in developing countries. And countries are exporting a lot of goods, particularly toward the United States and Europe. We live in a time of crisis that our audience knows. I usually divide in three points: the pandemia, the supply chain shortages and shocks, and then unfortunately the conflict in Ukraine, and obviously more and more the climate change. Now, what is happening in terms, if you want to give us a general scenario and how this is impacting on the environment, what is your take on this?
Yeah, thank you, Petro, and great to be here. Yeah, I think the crucial word when we talk about what is happening is uncertainty. And if you look at let's say the general mindset over the last 2-3 years, what I observe is that during the pandemic, we also had a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of people, both in the private sector and in the world of NGOs, were really convinced that once this pandemia was over, we would really start making things better than before. Build back better was a phrase that was often used. And yeah, the interesting thing is, now that the pandemia is over, or at least we hope it is, the word build back better, you don't hear it anymore. And that is because of the things that happened after and the huge uncertainty that we are in now. And I think that makes World Environment Day especially a good day to really take stock of where we are and where it is that we want to go. And you see a lot of pushback. People say, well, in the difficult times that we are now, we should step back a bit and the environment is less important. And I think also, given the uncertainty of where we are, maybe environment is even becoming more important than it was before.
Indeed, you somehow anticipated what was supposed to be my second broader question on this topic, because what is happening is even a consumer's perception has changed in a way. Before, there was more interest on health, more interest on sustainability, then particularly with the pandemic, but more and more with the war, is a crisis, the fear that there will not be enough energy, the fear there will not enough energy in terms of food, energy, kilocalories. And therefore, there is a shift in the focus. This is one of the risks that we're seeing. And since Europe is also undertaking the big legislation, the big challenge of the farm to fork and the zero deforestation policy, what would be your recommendation today, that is the Environment Day? What is your recommendation to the EU?
Well, my first recommendation would be to focus on resilience. And resilience also means resilience towards climate change, and also making sure that we are better prepared for shocks than we have been before. And that, I think, would focus us and steer us in a way that can and should also be more environmentally friendly. because I think a lot of the dependencies we have in the system are often also not environmentally very sound. So I think if we focus on more working towards soil health, reducing fertilizer use, and building a stronger and more resilient system, I think that can be both environmentally sound and economically wise.
Thank you, Gert, particularly for focusing on the word resiliencies together with sustainability. Michelle, I come to you as you lead this fascinating organization. The first time I heard your name as the Orangutan Land Trust. Before telling us what this is for our Italian audience and for our now international audience, the lockdowns and the pandemia, the war in Ukraine, and particularly the speed, increasing speed of climate change, and in general, what Gert said correctly, uncertainty. How is it affecting the different species around the world today that we celebrate Environment Day, and last week we celebrated the Biodiversity Day?
Well, I think that the threats to species continue apace, maybe perhaps a little bit exacerbated by these different events, and as Gert pointed out, maybe some detraction from addressing these issues because we're being faced with pandemic and Ukraine crisis and cost of living crisis that we're experiencing here in the UK. Lots of other things forward in the thoughts of the public. But the crux of it is human use of landscapes is going to be one of the greatest drivers of extinction or at least biodiversity loss, that along with increased climate change. These are two really on the forefront of the threats to biodiversity, that and pollutants, plastic and pollutants in our oceans and waterways, as well as in our landscapes. So as we look to meet the demands for resiliency, to ensure that the planet has enough food to sustain itself as populations grow, that we need to really consider how do we bring together meeting those demands within our planetary boundaries, and ensuring that the future use of these landscapes for both human uses and for biodiversity.
Thanks, Michelle. And obviously your organization is called Orangutan Land Trust, and I see in your background, it's bad to see always in background, but our backgrounds are there, our homes are there for for everybody. I see these more and very cute orangutans, and obviously orangutans bring a lot of emotion in our perception. But you mentioned the ocean, and I always like to remind our audience that every year more than 90 million sharks approximately are killed for their fins, and sometimes because of tuna fishing as well. They're just useless without any purpose, kill and thrown in the water. So it's not just a problem for those animals that looks like us. But you've been working with orangutans for the past 20 years, and I'm sure you've done an incredible job. Have you seen any change in the better, or unfortunately in the worse, in the past 20 years?
Well, it's been a challenge, obviously, for maintaining the survival of orangutans, but the attitude towards how we're addressing that is what has changed and gives us more hope for the future. So in my early years, which was actually more than 28 years that I've been doing this.
30 years.
Nearly 30 years. I'm aging myself. The focus in those early years and for quite a while was picking up the pieces, a Band-Aid therapy to what we were seeing happening to this species, and kind of a siloed kind of way of addressing the conservation of the species as just one species rather than the ecosystem that maintains them. we were very busy picking up orangutans that had been displaced or injured because of human activities, be that expansion of oil palm, mining, logging, pulp and paper, all kinds of threats, and as well as the trade, the illegal trade and ownership of orangutans. So it was always just scrambling around trying to pick these animals up and put them in a sanctuary. And about 20 years ago, we started thinking, we have to address the root causes of what's happening to these animals. And when we do address those root causes, the orangutans becomes a kind of flagship or umbrella species. As you mentioned, the emotion attached to them, the bond that we feel with this species that looks similar to us, helps us then to draw attention from policymakers, donors, the public, for solutions that are not only going to benefit the orangutan, but all the species and biodiversity in the habitats in which they live. We come to discover that most orangutans live outside of protected areas, that they're in areas that are prone to human activity. Over 10,000 orangutans live in areas allocated for oil palm in Borneo alone. So we needed to look for solutions, knowing that these activities are here to stay, likely to increase with human populations increasing globally, that we need to find the solutions to maintain orangutans and ecosystems where they are found in collaboration with development. And how can we do that sustainably and fairly? And we started to see not only ourselves, but other organizations across the conservation community kind of, sit down at tables, roundtable on RSPO for roundtable on sustainable palm oil, for example, sit down with the policymakers and the drivers of this destruction and seek solutions rather than being NGOs versus development.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I think that kind of collaboration, the Pongo Alliance, Palm Oil and NGO Alliance, working to restore orangutan habitat in areas impacted by oil palm, making the connectivity for species, not only orangutans and elephants, but all kinds of species to move through those landscapes that have been fragmented by oil palm. So
thank you, Michelle, because you do a tremendous job that most of the time is unseen. So today, that is the World Environment Day, we definitely want to bring this, up to the surface and making this as much as possible your voice heard. And you are, of course, Michelle from the Orangutan Land Trust, but also we have Gert from Solidaridad, and Solidaridad is doing as well a great and I would say tremendous and job, particularly now that we have these disruptions, and this disruption have affected supply chain. And supply chain, they see not just raw material, because we talk about commodities all the time and the price of commodities, but along this supply chain we have people that often work in developing, so-called developing countries. Your organization is mostly working, with sustainability, but particularly with people. What is Solidaridad doing to support the sustainability of the supply chain, but also the inclusion of the supply chain?
Yeah, well, Solidaridad, we have this Spanish name because we started 50 years ago as an organization working in Latin America, and now are working in around 40 countries with more than 1,000 people on the ground in 13, 14 different supply chains. The largest part of our work is working with farmers, but also workers in for instance, textiles and golds, to improve sustainability of production and try to link that to actors throughout the supply chain. So companies that are buying their material. What Michelle just said reminded me of an interview I had with a student last week, who after an hour of talk about the work that I've done for Solidaridad for the last 15 years, asked me, how can you still remain positive? I told her, well, in fact, I think it's not too difficult to remain positive, because Yeah, sure. It is easy to focus on things that are still going wrong and need to be improved. But if I look at what we have done over the last 15 years, I do see a lot of improvement and progress, from a reduction in deforestation taking place in palm oil in Southeast Asia, but also improvement of livelihood of farmers, from training, from connecting them to markets. And indeed, it is about combining people and the planet. And I often start my presentations with a quote from Chris Willey, who was one of the founders of Rainforest Alliance, who said, yeah, if you talk about reducing deforestation, it's important to realize that in the end, only farmers can change farming. And if you want to reduce deforestation, it does require farming to be different. And that starts with working with farmers and building a system that is changing and that is able to produce enough without expanding into the forest. And that can be done and is increasingly being done in a lot of places.
Gert, exactly on this, and I come to the last question because I would love to go on with this really beautiful discussion because there are so many things you guys have done and you guys are doing, particularly with Solidaridad. I know beside working in developing countries on many supply chains, cocoa, palm oil, and so on, you are also doing great work in the Netherlands and working with students throughout Europe, and that's because they are the citizens of the future. Is very important, not just to have them protesting down the street, but also to engage them in the decision-making process and in also understanding how the supply chains are working. Talking about being optimistic and talking about involving producing countries, what do you think? What is your position, your take, or your organization take on the due diligence that Europe is trying to develop? Because sometimes the feeling is Europe is dictating, or the West in general. I was listening to this beautiful interview on the BBC a few days ago of one guy in I don't remember the African country, but he was talking about elephants, and he had his own approach to that. And he said there are too many elephants in his country. And he said it's a problem not just for human, it's a problem for the ecosystem because we have too few, now there are too many. And he said, and the BBC guy said, but you know what? In the West, we want to defend elephants. And the guy said, well, we sent some elephants to New York and London, and then you tell us what's happening. I think it was hilarious. I said, yeah, probably is right. But do you think that Europe is moving in the right direction on this, or we should involve and engage more exactly about what you said, producing countries and people in producing countries?
Yeah. Well, I think your last sentence gives the key element of what it is about. And I think if we want to reduce environmental and social risks or problems in supply chain, engagement is the key issue. And while we are working with other NGOs, but also with companies to try to influence the European Union to improve its due diligence proposal that is exactly focusing on this, and say that the starting point there should be engagement with countries, but also engagement with actors and farmers in the supply chain. And to give you one example, there is a lot of discussion about child labor in the cocoa sector, and there are estimates that there are more than 1 million children working in cocoa farms in Ghana and Ivory Coast. And if we then would say, well, we disconnect from these farms and we will not buy from those farmers, that will not solve anything in reducing child labor. So if we want to reduce child labor there, we should engage with those farmers, make sure that their income is improved by paying a better price, by supporting them to improve production, because the root cause of child labor is poverty. So what we should do is engage there, work with them, and work together on improvement. And that is the same for deforestation. That is the same for, I think, most social and environmental issues. And that should also be the core of what the EU is proposing on due diligence. Start with engagement and start with working together on improvement.
Thank you, Gert from Solidaridad, for being here today at the World Environment Day. Michelle, I'm coming to you to close our podcast, Futuro Prossimo, Next Future in English. We have to give a name in English as well. One thing that has surprised me when for the first time I heard about you was that following the life and the protection of biodiversity, and particularly the orangutan, you were exactly doing what Gert said. You were working with the palm oil producers, with the palm oil country, unlike most of the other NGOs, let's say in your field, that instead tend to boycott this. Besides following what Gert said here, what is that drives you or drove you in that direction?
We go back to that emotional level. I came into working with orangutans on a purely emotional level. I fell in love with one orphaned orangutan that stole my heart when I did a short volunteering stint, and it changed my life forever. Knowing orangutans, helping to rescue them and care for them in a sanctuary that I helped develop with my best friend, made me have a commitment to do all I could to save their lives. Conventional production of palm oil was costing thousands and thousands of orangutan lives, and I felt I had to do something about it. And I couldn't do it on my own. I had to do it with the players that were on the ground, the very users of those landscapes, the governments that decide how landscapes are used, and bring on board the other NGOs who at first were perhaps a little bit skeptical, but there were some other leading NGOs that were on board with this idea of driving sustainability in the palm oil supply chain as the way to saving orangutans. We know that palm oil has been catastrophic for orangutans and their habitat, and it's for this reason that we really believe that the single most important thing that we can do to save the orangutan is demand sustainable palm oil, and that goes for all of the environment, all of biodiversity, is by demanding sustainable use of land, sustainable farming, sustainable commodities, etc. This is the only way that we're going to be able to meet the needs of growing populations for food and fuel, etc., as well as save biodiversity. There's no other way to do it except for in conjunction with one another.
And you took the hard way. You took the, let's say, the most difficult way. Easier, I think very easy was to say, let's boycott palm oil, for instance.
You know what? In the first few days, in the very beginning, more than a few days, I was one of those people. I soon realized that was no solution. And
you thought, we got to work. So what would be your message today for those ones that are saying boycott? And I have to say less and less, but what would you say?
I think you're right. I think most leading conservation experts and organizations are now on board. We have a statement in support of sustainable palm oil, for example, that's been signed by close to 100 leading conservation organizations around the world. So the realization that this is the way forward in protecting environment has come to pass. I think there's still a few smaller organizations that, again, driven by emotion, they're very right to feel completely outraged at what's happening to wildlife. But perhaps they haven't explored enough the nuance of the issues, and that complex situations like this do require complex solutions. No easy solution. Certification alone is not going to fix everything. It's going to take all the players coming together to make the future bright for orangutans and for the environment in general.
Every year we have the World Environment Day, and I like to say it's a long journey. Probably there is no end. There will always be a next challenge. When we achieve something, there's already something else. We don't have time to celebrate. There's always something else that we need to achieve. It's also full of, and you guys probably know better than me, it's also full of frustration, and we deal with that every day. But it's part of the dialectic. I remember that particularly in once Gert, you were there. I used to start my roundtables at the Sustainable Nutrition by saying, you know, we got to start from one problem. On this planet, we're 7.6 billion. But I realized a few weeks ago that now, so within a year, now we're 7.9 billion. And we're running toward being 10 billion. That means taking a lot of land, you know, also developing a lot of technology and innovation, true, but it means that we need a lot of food. We want to prosper correctly. And we want, you know, that means land, that means biodiversity, that means ecosystem. So I think we have a lot of work to do, very much work, in order to preserve our ecosystem and ensure more sustainability. Guys, thank you so much for taking your time. It's the 5th of June, and it's the World Environment Day. I had Michelle from the Orangutan Land Trust and Gert from the great Solidaridad network here with us at Futuro Prossimo. Thank you so much for being here, but particularly thank you so much because your Environment Day is every day, and you guys and your organization are really doing a terrific job. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. We talk.
Thank you. A real honor, Pietro. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, we see each other very soon with another podcast.